outside with a flashlight when her daughter comes home late at night. And I think it's terrible that the Whittier Police Department has to work in our area, in our neighborhood, when there's no lights. I have been criticized because I speak Spanish, but District 1 is 85% Latino, and it's important that I'm able to communicate with my constituents. I am very proud that I am able to run in District 1. I want to make Whittier a great place to live. I want to help my community because I love my community of Whittier. Thank you.
Yes, and now the next candidate for District 3, do your 3-minute opening.
Okay, awesome. Okay, great. Hello everyone, my name is Yasmin Farada and I'm running to be the next representative for Whittier City Council District 3. I have had the pleasure of being born and raised in this city, which means that I attended all the local schools and later went on to Cal State Long Beach, where I obtained my degree in sociology and Chicano studies. That led me to what my current profession is today, which is successfully transitioning high school students into universities and making sure that they remain retained. And so that's what I've dedicated my life to for the past 6 years. But I wanted to take a moment to thank you all for inviting me, and also for the folks involved in putting this on. You know, I've been born and raised in Whittier, which means that I've seen this city change a lot. However, our leadership has not changed, and lots of times we're faced with reactionary responses to issues that we've seen rising until they turn into full-blown crises. Obviously, one of those is our homelessness crisis. But before we dive into policy solutions, and you know, it's a very sensitive topic, I want to remind you that the homelessness issue in our city existed before the Boise ruling. Our city has had a shortage of beds for almost a decade and little to no affordable housing available to our residents. You know, this coupled with the high cost of living is a recipe for disaster. A year and a half ago, we drafted a homelessness plan. The city drafted a homelessness plan with many unattainable benchmarks and unrealistic objectives, and passed it off as a tangible plan. Today, we're no closer to addressing the issue than we were before. In fact, we have more homeless individuals in our communities. We have parks being shut down. And to me, that's a crisis that's affecting all of us. You know, the easy answer of sweeping people, closing parks, and criminalizing homeless doesn't work. We've given them vouchers, we've swept them from parks, and they're returning. We see them in another part of our city. And we know that that's not a comprehensive resolution. So something has to change. I think we need sustainable, collaborative solutions that bring the community into the conversation, which is why I'm so excited in the way that this forum today has been set up. Thank you for being here today, and I'm looking forward to sharing my platform with you all.
Now before we move on to the mayoral candidates, the other District 3 candidate, Kathy Warner, could not be here, but we offered her the opportunity, as we did all candidates who said they could not be here, the opportunity to record their responses to record an opening remark and the responses to our question. Kathy Warner took us up on that offer, and so we'll play her response right now.
Yeah, it was working just a minute ago.
Hi, Kathy Warner. Thanks so much for the invitation to be able to have a recording for the Candidates Forum today. I'm actually in Salt Lake City, Utah, attending an event with my granddaughter. It's a pre-wedding event in our temple, a religious event. So I'm sad that I'm not with you today, but thank you for letting me do the recording. So in regards to the topic of this particular Candidates Forum, homelessness and housing, as we all know, is a basic human need. And all of my life, I've had experiences and been very sensitive to housing needs, not only for family members, but also for friends, for members of the community, and it's been very far-reaching. When my mom was born, right after she was born, her father left, and so she and her mother and her brother were homeless, and they ended up moving in with her grandparents and lived with them for quite some time. My father had a similar experience. When he was a year and a half, he came to California with his parents and grandparents. His mother had passed away, and when he was 5, his father remarried, and because of circumstances in the family, he was not allowed to live with his father anymore. So he was literally homeless. Fortunately, he had a loving aunt and uncle that took him in and became his surrogate parents. So when my parents met and married, they had both had these experiences. And so growing up as a child in our family, we always had that sensitivity to be aware of other situations. And during my adult years, I saw my parents continuing to be examples of taking care of others and helping to provide homes for them. When I was in college, my father invited one of my best friends to live with us. She had been literally kicked out of her home. And that ended up being an amazing experience. And she and I are still friends to this day. And then when I married my husband and we started having our own family, we had similar experiences and similar situations on a personal level and also in the community. So I'm excited to be able to answer the questions that I received ahead of time. I won't be able to be there, of course, to answer the audience questions, but thank you again for letting me do the recording and participate.
And now we will continue the opening statements of the mayoral candidates. Once again, you have 3 minutes.
Hi, my name is Rolando Cano. Ladies and gentlemen, League of Women Voters of Whittier, Homes for Whittier and Sustainable City, I appreciate very much your generous invitation to be here today. Obviously, some of you might know that I am running for Whittier mayor. This is my 2nd time. One of the biggest issues that we have, that we all hear about, is the Boise case. Usually when laws are created, a judge will make a statement, and it's usually open-ended to allow cities to create their own laws, adapt, and enforce them. The difference between those decisions and the Boise case is that the judge was giving us a directive. Understanding that most cities no longer provide social services like Whittier, there was a difficult decision that had to be made. When the homeless were being cited for sleeping, sitting for too long, asking for money, trying to find a location to use the restroom, in Boise, it became such an issue that this group of 5 people filed a lawsuit. The judge reviewed this information and he gave his decision on a directive. The directive was, a city must provide a place for a person to sleep, an option before you can enforce your laws. There's no way around this, folks. It's like us when we tell our kids, you better eat your vegetables or no video games. It's plain and simple. I propose to you the ability to make Whittier Boise compliant. What does that mean? We use a structure like our old police station, turn it into an emergency shelter, provide services for the homeless, for those that accept it and those that are service resistant. We have to push out, clear a path for those that need this help. This is a location that's secure, where we can use our nonprofits to come in and provide the services that are needed. With the current over $300,000 that Whittier has dedicated for the homeless, we could start this option as soon as tomorrow. Obviously, not as soon as tomorrow, but within 90 days, because we have to present a plan, have a conversation, and then execute it. But this is possible here in Whittier, a city that lays within a 15-mile radius. Anywhere else might be impossible. Whittier, we can become Boise compliant, enforce our laws, and clear a path for help.
Could we hold them? Thank you. Can we hold on for 1 second? First of all, I apologize. There might be a problem with the timer, so I apologize for the beeping during your opening
This
statement.
past Tuesday night, the council.
And all right, please, the next mayoral candidate.
Thank you. First, I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters, Homes for Whittier, and Sustainable Cities for hosting us today. As a point of information, to be transparent, I have been a board member of Sustainable Cities until about 4 months ago. I took a leave just to maintain transparency and not have any conflict. But I've consider myself a community organizer, and really the mission of the fledgling nonprofit drew me to look at a lot of the issues that we are looking at within the city of Whittier. My name is Luis Reyes. I've lived in Whittier for 28 years. I'm married with 2 young children. Over there, finally get to see them today on the weekend. And after a little bit about myself, I moved to Whittier when I was roughly about 21 years old. Followed my mom. Grew up in the desert with my dad. Really, when you turn 18, a young adult, go make your way in life back then. So said, there's more opportunities in LA. So came here, Whittier, and loved it. Started working with my family. Went to school when I was 26, and it was affordable. I mean, back then you could rent a studio apartment or rent a room and work and still be affording and be out of the house. And that was kind of expected of me as a young adult. Moving forward, went to school at Rio Hondo College. Got to know a lot of great friends. Transferred to USC in public policy. Worked for the local assembly member in the early 2000s for about 3-4 years. Was this district director, dealing with a lot of the issues. Always working, living in Whittier, making things manageable. Moving forward, we're still having a lot of repercussions from the Great Recession. Those are things that we need to address, and as homelessness, the crisis had come to a point where it really took me and looked inside myself as a person and said, you know what, we can do better. And as an advocate, I've been consistently saying we need beds. Beds, beds, beds. It's something that we've dealt with ongoing, yet for some reason the council is barely looking at a shelter. Yet we've had a year and a half of a plan, and even more so before that, it's been longer. So that's why one of the reasons why I chose to run is, we can do better, and let's get to work and make things happen. It's wrong. We should treat people with humanity, dignity, and respect, and get them in the beds, and give them showers. Whittier does not have any showers on a daily basis for people to maintain their human dignity. And that's an issue for me. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for taking time out of your Saturday to be here today. Also, thank you so much to Sustainable City, thank you to Homes for Whittier, and thank you to the League of Women Voters for being here. And my name is Christine Singer, and I am running for Mayor of Whittier. As a lifelong Whittier resident and Cultural Arts Commissioner appointed by the City Council, I believe that good government should solve local problems. Elected leaders must communicate with residents, and we need foresight. From our budget crisis to our homelessness issue, we are borrowing the city and not protecting our city for the next generation. Through my podcast, What's Up Whittier, we've invited guests from local businesses, nonprofits, and throughout the community to talk about why we all love Whittier and what keeps us here. People ask me, why not City Council first? Why Mayor? This is why. We are transitioning into a new decade, and we need courageous leaders for challenging times. As your next Mayor of Whittier, I am committed to serve you and make local government work for residents and businesses. Regarding homelessness, it touches really close. Like my colleague here mentioned, we're coming out of the Great Recession, and my generation has been a huge part of entering into the workforce in very challenging times. I'll share with you this personal anecdote of mine. When I was in college, I was working for a chiropractor, and I was making decent money, okay? Unfortunately, I could not rent a place on my own because I did not make the required 30%, or I believe that now when you're applying for apartments, your monthly income needs to at least be sustainable enough for you to live there. So what did I do? I moved in with my sister, and I couldn't necessarily afford half of the rent. I couldn't. What I did do was I gave her $200 and I cleaned the house and I made sure it looked nice. But that was my only option. There are individuals on these streets that do not have that option. I work here in Uptown Whittier. I'm here all the time, and I'm consistently communicating and engaging with individuals who may have been kicked out of their home for one reason or another, who got caught up in the gang life and have never had professional job experience. This is a tragedy. So one thing I do like about our Whittier homelessness plan currently is that we have a navigation center in the plan, which is great. You know, some things that are proposed are beds. Absolutely, we need to have beds, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in our next decision, in our next question. But truly what we need is to not only, we just need to, this is a public health crisis. We need to cognitively, emotionally, and physically reintegrate individuals into our society. I'm not a public health expert. I received that information from my friend Sophia, who is a master's in public health. And learning the neuroscience behind disease is the most important way in regarding to prevention of homelessness. And also there's, thank you.
Go. So good afternoon. It's an honor to be your mayor. And let me just tell you very quickly, I didn't do it last time, but I figure at this forum here we can just tell you kind of the big picture because we're going to get into some specifics. I was born here in Whittier, was raised here. I've raised my family here, currently living here, obviously. This is my home for a long, long time. And people say, well, why do you do this? Well, I do it because it's my time to give back. And it's a time of transition, of making things happen as we move into this 21st century, the next decade. So what do I believe? I'm all about public safety. I'm all about jobs and strong economic development. I'm all about making sure we maintain Whittier's values, respect, property values, looking out for one another, you name it. There's a whole slew of them. That's what's all about for me. But this campaign is all about a vision for the future. When I say that, what do you mean? I mean talking about the betterment of the next 2 generations. And what that means also is all these families that are moving into Whittier, we have a number moving into Whittier, they're here to grab that same promise that my parents had when they came here many years ago, when I was here raising my family. So I'm very bullish. Why am I bullish? I'm bullish because of the things we're looking at. People mover, potentially. Looking at autonomous vehicle, looking at the gold line. By the way, there's going to be an announcement, a special announcement on the gold line here very shortly that I think you're going to like. Uptown, new parking structure, new restaurants coming in, new shopping opportunities. The Grows of Whittier, which will raise the values, the property values of the west end of Whittier and bring us more into equality between East, Central, and West Whittier. So this is a good time. But we do have the one issue on homelessness, and we're going to talk about that. We are doing quite well when it comes to families, with the Whole Child and the Salvation Army and Imagine Whittier. But we have the issue relative to adults, male and female, who are out on the street. And we're going to talk about that. And the city has a plan, believe it or not, and it's being followed. So we're going to keep working on homelessness as it evolves, because it's not what it was just a year ago. But we are committed, I'm committed to moving forward on that. So what do I hear from people going door to door? What do I hear from people going to coffees? It's all about making sure that we as a community stay tight, stay together, and keep moving forward into the future. That's what they're telling me. And so I'm committed to that. I'm committed to making sure that we do that. And I'm very bullish, I'm going to say it again, on Whittier. I'm excited. Thank you.
And now we will move to the next stage of the forum. As I said before, all the candidates receive 3 questions. They will have 3 minutes to answer. I'll start off with the first question. Hopefully I'll only have to read this once, but if you want me to reread it, candidates, I will do so, and it won't count against your time. The first question. In Martin v. Boise, the Ninth Circuit ruled that homeless people could not be criminalized for sleeping in public. They could not be offered another place to sleep. Now that the Supreme Court has allowed that decision to stand, what is Whittier's best path forward to provide public safety and protect constitutional rights, including avoiding lawsuits? Maggie, you have 3 minutes.
Well, it's unfortunate that there are judges at the 4 cities to deal with great expense to keep public spaces clean when people show up and clean parks for themselves. It seems that there is something that we must deal with. Martin versus Boise dictates that someone cannot be punished for sleeping in public spaces. This does not mean that we cannot enforce rules regarding littering and safe access to transportation, third way like sidewalks and parking lots. There is nothing preventing us from enforcing ordinances against leaving large quantities of personal belongings and in public spaces, or pitching tents and banning the use of sidewalks. This should be justified in the interest of preventing the obstruction of traffic. It is very important that we all understand the problem. It's not the presence of homeless people. The difficulty is with some who cause problems with sanitation, litter, and ordinances with other members of the public. As for more permanent solutions, we are all essentially ordered by the courts to provide public housing in order to keep people from living in parks. We need to work with everyone, and we should cooperate as a community to provide said housing. This means lobbying for additional state and federal grants for quickly expanding programs, particularly considering the high property values here in Southern California, preventing large properties for public shelter, state or county assistance. Notwithstanding notwithstanding the fact that we are not fully utilizing what we can expand our support. We should have professional shelters that are managed to keep our community and people off the streets.
Same question.
Thank you. So the first thing that we need to do is ensure that we have enough beds in our more beds in our existing stock. Even if the Boise decision was never handed down, we still have needed more beds, and the city knew that as well. When we talk about public safety and protecting constitutional rights, our Whittier Police Department cannot do their job if we do not offer the sufficient amount of beds. It is not a police department versus the homelessness issue either, as I have actually gotten, from speaking to homeless people living in our park myself, they do have good experiences with our Whittier PD, but they currently have their hands tied. They cannot move forward in any direction because we don't have the sufficient amount of beds, and this has been an issue that we've known about. We've had folks actually mention Officer Ballots, badge number 410, who has been super, helpful and friendly and doing what he can to ensure that both parties have a decent and dignified experience with whatever, issues that he can. In the bigger picture, though, we need to work with county agencies to ensure streamlining. So things like coordinated entry system. So all of nonprofits know exactly who's going in and what they're going in for and how they can get the assistance that they need. The homeless population is not a monolith. Everybody needs different services, so we need to ensure that we're meeting them where they're at. Long-term, we need affordable housing that goes beyond market rate. I don't believe that's a pipe dream. I believe that we know there's a lack of affordable housing to a point where the state of California is now mandating us to provide new low-income units. And I also believe that in order to provide folks with a dignified experience in protecting constitutional rights, we have to stop criminalizing folks that are sleeping outside. When we know this is not something that we can simply blame on substance abuse or mental health issues or lack of affordable housing. I mean, these things are all a combination of them. And we also know that folks that are experiencing mental health issues and addiction issues are also many times housed if they have the means or they're coming from a socioeconomic background that allows them to. So one thing does not equal the other, and I think we also need to ensure we're including that when we talk about treating humans with dignity and respect. After all, speaking of how much being born and raised in Whittier is important, as the only person who has, or in my district as well, at least, that has been going to Parnell Park and speaking with folks to see what their needs are as well, most of them, if not all of them, were born and raised in Whittier. So when we talk about, having that passion for our city, I think that's all community members, not just the ones that can afford to be housed.
Once again, we're still on District 3, so that we'll have the recorded response from Kathy Warner.
Formed a new count this past November. Now that we have the information, this past Tuesday night, the council received the report of our homeless number from CityNet, who performed a new count this past November. Now that we have the information, the council should continue to communicate with federal judge David Carter, who adjudicated the Orange County Catholic Workers lawsuit. Based on talks thus far, it is anticipated that Judge Carter will implement a number for Whittier that is approximately 60% of our homeless count, and that will be the number of beds the city must provide to fulfill Martin v. Boise. The council took its next step this past Tuesday night at our council meeting by authorizing staff to release an RFQ for a navigation center, which would house the number of beds needed to comply with Judge Carter's settlement parameters, which would satisfy Martin v. Boise. The council will need to determine a physical location for a navigation center to be placed, and the council should also partner with and create joint powers authorities to deliver wraparound services to those housed in the navigation center.
And now the mayoral candidate's response.
All right, folks, this is a question I get asked often. I always get bombarded by people that tell me, you know what, this is a national problem. And they tell me, you can't solve that national problem. And I tell them, you're correct. That's why I'm not running for president. And then they tell me, this is a big issue in California. There's not much you can do because we're bombarded with the Boise case. And I remind them, I'm not running for governor. Then I tell them, you know what, I'm running for Whittier because we're small enough. We're within a 15-mile radius. So we're small enough to create the first solution and start talking about Boise compliancy. What does that mean? The judge gave us a specific order, but here we hear people saying, well, you know what? We're going to work with nonprofits. That's not what the judge said. They tell you, well, we're going to reach out with the community and organize a plan. That's not what he demanded. Here, we have the opportunity to stand our ground, become Boise compliant, provide those beds using a facility that we maintain currently today. In the old police station, we have showers, lockers. We have room for about 200 people if we design it just right. We can be compliant. But the Boise case and the decision puts us on the razor's edge. It tells us, one way or the other, whatever you decide, if you're a politician, you might be in trouble. I'm not a politician. I'm a member of this community that has to deal with this every day. I'm running because I'm tired of going and asking, please pay attention to this specific area. Please pay attention to our parks. What's happening? We all know. Bottom line is, if we take that first step and become compliant, provide an emergency shelter run by the city, the building itself, bring in outside sources like nonprofits to provide the services that they offer, start working with the community, and hold them in there. Don't take them out to go look for work for 8 hours, because we know once they leave, a lot of these people are addicted to drugs, mental illness. We need to provide the services to give them the footing to move forward. The best possible outcome is to start thinking the right way. We have representatives here that are going to pass this word, I hope. Boise compliance needs to be the next step. We need to talk about it and demand it. Not just enough, not let me hear what I'm told by a nonprofit or a plan created by someone else. I grew up in the 80s in East LA, off of Olympic and Eastern, in the 80s. Actually, many of you are very young here. None of you might remember this because you're young. But Reagan closed all these mental hospitals, released these people out, and we face mental illness and drug addiction. AB 109, Prop 47, Prop 57 did the same thing. Cleared their private prisons, sent them all out, and now we have to deal with it. So let's stand our ground.
I'm of the opinion that homelessness and being without home is not a crime. I'm in the opinion that we should have dealt with our issues and helped those in need without having a court order tell us what we need to do. Because the first time that I really looked at the policy issue of homeless was 2014, and I was involved in the homeless count. And you really got to understand this is a growing issue. And in my degrees in public policy, and I'm working for legislature, I've been taught to look beyond just the current now or the past, but how is things going to affect the future? And, you know, people might say things are great. Imagine when they're going to be bad in a couple years. It's an issue. And it's an issue that we need to deal with, and we should have dealt with. Homelessness hasn't changed all because the court ruling made it so that it forced people to do things. It's an issue that we should have dealt with. And, you know, I go back to the beds. Beds are the issue. We need to get beds and get people off the streets. And the complexity of beds on who to serve. Yes, families can get beds and get housed, but are you going to stay in Whittier? From understanding, there's the Bell Shelter and the Boyle Heights Shelter. They have to leave their home. They have to leave their schools. And I have two young kids that we go to public elementary, and I didn't know that there's a parent room specifically for homeless people. And the schools accommodate and trying to maintain dignity. See, for me, Boise, yeah, now we're forced to do what we should have done. But for me, in my values, we should have done it a long time ago. And we should have helped the churches and helped the nonprofits. Because I believe government should be involved in the social aspect and helping the community that are in need. That's just the difference between my values and other people's values. I do believe that. And if some people say, well, you know, that's too progressive, Louis. Well, that's fine, because change is needed at times. Because I'll tell you this, having done crisis management professionally, having seen things, it will get worse. One day, we're in a presidential campaign, and as a policy, you know that after president, something happens all the time, right? We hit a recession, we hit something, positive or negative. Well, we can't go up all the time. It will get worse. We need to fix it. Thank you.
So the question is, what is Whittier's best path forward to provide public safety and protect constitutional rights, including avoiding lawsuits? Well, from what I understand and what we heard in the video up there, is that Whittier is planning on entering into a lawsuit entered with other cities from Orange County as well as Bellflower. And that would require, say for instance the count was 200 people, 200 individuals that are living on our streets, we would require 60% of those beds, so we would need, 120 beds for these individuals. So I think, personally, Whittier's best path forward is, yes, to move forward. We need to count up all of the beds that we have, right? We need to look at what we're doing at Whittier First Day, the cold weather shelter. Personally, I have volunteered for the Interfaith Cold Weather Shelters in my temple, Vegetable of Whittier, since I was 18. And it wasn't really this is a homelessness crisis, please volunteer. It was really just, we do this every year, please volunteer your time. So I've taken it upon myself to volunteer my time, which has been a great experience. This year for me was a little different because I actually interacted with individuals, right? Because I'm running for office, and it's important for me to engage and learn about what people are facing these days. So moving forward, I think that some things that we need to look at is when I'm volunteering for the cold weather shelter, I learned that those individuals have been part of that cold weather shelter for as long as I've been volunteering. It's a cycle of homelessness, it's a cycle of poverty. We're moving into, the recession really did affect all of us. I totally agree with that. And it's a cycle, and the best way to get those people out of this cycle is, yes, to rehabilitate them, yes, to lead with love. It's important that we must know that the ultimate human connection is established through love and establishing trust. And the best way that we can all do that is by communicating, having clear communication, yes, treating people with dignity, and truly just, making sure that we have all these resources available. I do agree with you, Rolando. I like the idea of having it be right next to Whittier City Hall. I think that's great, because not only neighbors, I was at the City Council meeting when neighbors of Jimtown came out because they didn't want the homeless shelter to be built by the freeway. If you aren't familiar with Jimtown, it's a small community located off of Whittier Boulevard on the 605 freeway. They came out because they took their neighborhood out of poverty. And so, point being, I think the best place to keep to house these individuals, because that is our priority, to house, to rehabilitate, to get people back into society that once did not want them. People are not trash. I've heard that in the community, which is very true. So we need to remember, people are people. We all, and it's hard, and it's how beautiful is it to give a hand to lift others up. Because if we all empower our community, we can all rise up together. Thank you.
So this is a really good question, because there's a fine balance between individual rights of those who are homeless and the rights of the community in general. And there's a huge public safety component to that balance, which is very important to me. So, what's going on in Whittier? We have a plan. And we're following that plan right now. No matter how people want to critique it, we have a plan, we're following it. What are we doing? We're joining with other cities. We're joining with the cities in Orange County. We're joining with Bellflower. We will be the second city potentially in Los Angeles County to join in. And what we're going to do is a settlement that ends up ultimately being a consent decree. And what it does, it says we have to provide beds for 60% of those who have been denominated as homeless in Whittier. So, but that's beds for those who want beds, okay? And that's a huge, huge if. And what are we doing? We're working this right now, actually, as you're sitting here today. In return, what do we get? We get strong enforcement of the police department throughout the city, and in parks, public places, etc. So, curfew laws, camping laws. This would be a federal court judgment, and it would get back up to the Whittier PD and protect us from lawsuits, which is part of the question here. So, we have to do a census to determine how many beds. It came out Tuesday night. There it is. If you haven't looked at it, there's some real interesting information in it. And we're working on finding those beds right now. And the mayor, I am committed to this process. But there's an issue here. We all need to get real. We need to get real about something. And that is that in this census, almost 70% of the people self-identified as either having mental issues or drug or alcohol addiction. Now, the question becomes, is the city of Whittier going to be able to treat those people? Can we provide the funding? Can we do what's necessary to take care of them? Do we want to? Absolutely want to help them. But we're the city of Whittier. We're in a deficit situation. Nobody's talking about that. But let's get real. So where's the responsibility? The responsibility relative to mental illness is at the state level. Landrum-Petra-Short Act. Nothing's been done on that in years. In order to see someone go and get their help, there has to be there's a very high standard. The state legislature isn't talking about that. What about Prop 57, Prop 47, AB 109? That's a state issue. A lot of those folks are on our streets now. What's the state doing about that? Guys, we're getting dumped on, but we're going to work it, and we have a plan. Right there.
All right, our next question is as follows. The state of California mandates the city of Whittier to revise the housing element of its general plan to add 3,398 new housing units between 2021 and 2029. Of these, about 1/3 needs to be for very low income households, 1/3 for above moderate income households, and about 1/3 between low income and moderate income households. Whittier has not met its housing element goals in the past, but the state is putting teeth into this mandate. How will you ensure that Whittier meets its state mandated housing goals? You have 3 minutes.
3298 new units of housing in less than a decade is a tall order. A state mandate to so greatly increase our supply of housing in such a short amount of time should be given some amount of resistance. It's not an impossible task, but we should definitely make ourselves heard in the state or legislative, given our lack of access to open space to develop new housing. Our only option is to foster redevelopment on some selected areas of small density and suburban neighborhoods to accommodate more people in the same area. Doing so without significantly raising taxes has to be the goal, and that cannot be done fast. We will need hundreds of acres of land in the city to convert from single-family households with large yards to multi-family facilities like apartments and condominiums. Our specific plan in Uptown Whittier allows for high-density residential property, but that capacity is not being used. It is time to make it happen. It's time to make it happen, and we have to declare it a plan. We can offer various incentives for redevelopment, using buildings that we could use in the near term. We need to investigate ways to spur the use of areas sitting unused and the redevelopment of numerous empty and condemned buildings throughout the city as well. We have large amounts of buildings. According to a survey, about 250,000 square feet of land in Uptown Whittier alone. It has been empty literally for decades, and our buildings throughout the town sitting empty. Outside of Uptown, there are pockets of empty land. We need to buy the vacant land and use it for redevelopment. There are many people that are holding on to lots, and they've been empty for a long
start their lives. And the reality is, purchasing a home is not what it was 40 years ago. I myself am 29 years old. In order for me to purchase a home, I have to be making over $80,000 this year, which, as I'm working full time, it's a decent job. I went to college, and it's still not enough. And that's the reality, if we want to get real, that a lot of people are facing today. So our council talks a lot about how the state took away our redevelopment money and used for affordable housing, but that was almost a decade ago, right? So there's no more excuses for not addressing this issue, especially when public opinion collected that residents support developing affordable housing, temporary housing, ADU housing, and working with landlords to ensure that they're accepting housing vouchers, right? So while property value is important, so is also making space for Whittierites to continue living in Whittier. Whittier doesn't have a lot of land, so we need to be more intentional with developments than we have in the past. That may mean we need to look at our zoning laws and look at how things like live workspaces or adaptive reuse housing and all of that is done. We also need to talk about aesthetics and how low-income housing doesn't necessarily mean what we think it may mean, right? There is a lot of stigma regarding low-income housing, and that can be rectified by having mixed-income housing. For example, the Gables is a successful example of how mixed housing can happen. And so that was with development money, but we can revisit that. And just because they took it away 10 years ago during the recession doesn't mean that we can't revisit it now. So when we look at this, I think it's important that what we're doing is responding to it in a way that meets the needs of Whittierites today, not the Whittierites 50 years ago. The reality is our reality is changing, and I believe our leadership should change with it, and that's how we move Whittier forward.
Once again, there will be a video response.
By utilizing Whittier's housing element goals can be met by utilizing zoning waivers, as well as creating partnerships wherein the city land may be used for a project with a developer. An example would be that the council will soon be issuing an RFP for the Alpha Beta site for very low and low income housing units.
Yes. Up to 3 minutes does not mean you have to take all 3 minutes. Please take note, all candidates. Now, on to the rural candidates.
Okay, folks, this is definitely an important question because we need to understand what cities that are meeting this requirement by the state are actually doing. These cities have sustainability managers, which Whittier has not and does not. We put that job onto our city manager. Now, I wouldn't go to a liquor store to get a surgery from a clerk. You need someone that's specialized to address this issue. One of the biggest issues that we have here is that we have a lot of management companies that manage a lot of rental locations. Day in and day out, I hear how they raise the rent from one month to the next, from, let's say, $1,500 to $1,800, which is impossible in this economy. There's no control, but it's always up to the community to decide what we do next. Rent control, it's a very difficult issue there. It's very, very critical. And most people, when they mention that, they cringe because many of us here own properties. But what's an option? We hear it on the news, we hear ADUs. In Whittier, we hear developments like the Nells or the Groves, whatever you want to call it. 700 plus houses, affordable? I don't think so, not on anyone's general salary overall. One of the people here, one of the possibly future council people, I'm not sure, but she mentioned that you need at least $80,000 to purchase a home. When you look at the old census, the majority on this side of Whittier average about 70,000. 70,000 is a large number in Whittier because it's a great place to live. But when you're looking at a development of 700 plus properties and the city does not really impose their ability to negotiate, to create affordable housing to meet the requirements, then things just happen and the developers decide how much these homes are going to sell for. But there's something that people talk about, ADUs. We don't want to change our structure. I live on Beverly Drive. On Davidson, we have this large structure that we fought against. We said we don't want 60 plus homes here. It doesn't fit with our area, the way we live. If you build ADUs, approve a fast track system for approval, and approve about 100 plus monthly of ADUs, we can meet a large portion of this requirement without building these gigantic structures that crowd us out. Our parents are getting older. Our kids, we send them out to be successful. They come back home. We need a place for them, but we need to make it affordable. We need to meet the standard. We should be looking at hiring a sustainability manager, but we don't, because we always talk about the budget. I haven't been here over 10 decades. I'm not aware of what happened, but some have. So we need to find out what happened.
So California mandates, you often hear the issue regarding the state says that we have to do this and we're in this bind. But one of the things that we've encountered over the last decade since the Great Recession, again, the cycle of it is a lot of building. There's a lot of building here in Whittier. And one of the things that other cities and people that are aware of having affordability in their plans is making sure that 10 to 30% of that new housing is affordable or non-market rate. We wouldn't have as much problems if we would have exclusionary housing plans within our city. We don't. And the reason why I know this is professional. I do work. I'm in communications. I do outreach. I work for developers at times. I work with developers all over LA Live. And there's always a negotiation between the developers and the community in creating what's called a community benefits agreement. And they have to go out there and knock on the doors and get agreement and get buy-in. As mayor, I would do that. Any development would have to go to the city, knock on the doors, not send the little postcard letter, 500 square feet or 300, 1,000 square feet. Knock on doors and talk and meet. ADUs, accessory dwelling units, granny flats. I have a plan. I would love to build about 500 granny flats in the city of Whittier. How? You do incentives. You waive. You make it easier. The city of Whittier is being sued by the realtors. Imagine that. The realtors. Which, they're pretty market rate and open and don't like government overall. Most realtors are conservatives. But imagine the city being sued by that, because it's just harder to do it here. One of the things that I've talked to people about is single room occupancies. We need to look at the new way of working. Single room occupancies, or SROs, are when people have shared living arrangements, they have shared bathrooms, shared common areas, and they just have a room where they rent it or they own it. Those are great living arrangements that comes affordable. We used to have 2 of them that were dilapidated, the Hadley Hotel and the Greenleaf Inn, I think. They removed, that was about 120 units. But, you look at that, you see blight, you see, that's something that should, but look at the new way of doing things. There's some great looking SROs that would meet people's way of new living. And SROs are not new. Throughout the world, someone mentioned, that's pretty common throughout the world. Where they called hostels or range limited or different things. But we need to think differently and make sure that we have some density to meet these goals. Thank you.
So, how will you ensure that Whittier meets its state-mandated housing goals? First and foremost, I think it's important to work with developers like Link Housing to create these developments that are affordable, that meet the affordability impacts that we need. Are you familiar with Mosaic Gardens? If you're not, you can drive down Philadelphia and Pickering, I believe. There's a beautiful housing development there that houses Section 8 individuals, and that is Mosaic Gardens. So that's a great example of how we can work with developers. And in addition, mixed-use housing and ADUs, granny flats. I think those 2 things are great. What we need to address address is our planning department. We can have great, ambitious goals to make this happen, but we need to develop an efficient process at City Hall. And as the mayor, I'm not a micromanager. I can't go in and tell the planning department, hey, you need to do this, you need to do this. I can do my best to work with the city manager and work with other experts that are knowledgeable about these processes to develop an easy process. Just this morning I was canvassing and this individual was telling me, well, you know, I've been trying to build this on my property and it's been a hard time, and you know. So from property owners, yes, it is a struggle to make changes to your homes because of the inefficiency process. So that would be my main goal as the next mayor of Whittier, to really increase productivity and process and efficiency regarding developing new housing. If we don't have like that efficiency at City Hall, things will take longer and longer and longer. Thank you.
So the arena numbers, 3,400 new units here in Whittier, 3,400 new units. Where do we put them? We're a build-out city. We're a build-out city. We don't have lots of land to build new housing. I think we all know that. And then, so how do we take 3,400 new units without impacting our quality of life? Like traffic, like noise. I mean, think about it. So, yet this is what Sacramento is pushing down on us. And you're gonna hear me talk about Sacramento because we are being bombarded by different things to do. And yet they even don't give us the money for it. So remember, I'm going to talk about redevelopment because at that point in time, when Governor Brown took that money away, we used that money to subsidize developers, owners, to do affordable housing. We did it, and we did a fair amount of it. So they took it away, and last year, Sacramento had $21.5 billion. Hear that? $1 billion. Some of which is our former redevelopment money that we could use right now. Do you think that we're going to get some of that money? You think it's going to get sent down here to help us do what we want to do? We want to do affordable housing. But we don't have an unending pot of money. So what have we done? Link housing, just Mosaic Gardens was done that way. The Gables was done that way. We did Silent Seconds. We did the Pan and Comstock just down the street here. So we have been working it. In fact, we've done over 300 new homes and rehabs in the last 10 years with the money that we had. But that was redevelopment money. We don't have any money out of our general fund that we can do this. And guess what? Much of our money right now, part of it out of general funds, going to homelessness issues. So all I can tell you is there are some ideas that I have, that we have. One is to basically find some creative funding sources to go regional. This was just, we had the COG had something just this week on different ideas of how to do things together for efficiencies of scale. We talked about zoning. We could probably do some rezoning to incentivize developers. Easier permitting, we could knock our fees down. So there's a number of things that we can do, but the bottom line is it takes money. And we're being bandied about, pushed down by the state. And I would encourage our state legislators, and I know Kyle's here, and we've talked about this, to look at how they can help us. Don't just tell us what to do. We want to do affordable housing, but we don't have the means or the resources at this level to do that, especially when we're having to deal with so many other issues.
All right. Our next question is, given political will in Whittier in support of different types of housing, emergency, transitional, affordable, supportive, what would you put where? What would you build? How long will it take? What services would be provided? How much will it cost? Once again, candidates, you have 3 minutes to respond.
The best option for a homeless shelter would be purchasing a warehouse in Southwest Whittier near Santa Fe Springs. That could be a base for a facility housing hundreds. Such a project could cost millions of dollars. It would be professionally maintained by a specialist who has been successful in maintaining a successful homeless or a place for to help the homeless community. Marvin's Gardens is an example. The Nels facility could have been a world-class location for a regional homeless initiative, but it seems that in recent years, Whittier has cared more for profit than compassion, or at best has lacked in imagination and focus, as business as usual. There are no easy options. Anything easy is not a permanent solution for anyone. The events that lead to homelessness are traumatic. Chronically homeless people need to work through a pipeline of assessment, mental health treatment, medical care, counseling, life skills, development, and education in order to become self-sustained, so that they are able to enter our society again. A shower or a bed is not enough. The reality is that Whittier can't be alone on this. We need to pursue state and federal funding for this sort of thing. We cannot do it ourselves. We need to bring in stakeholders in Whittier and other surrounding communities. We can establish large shelters on the edge of Whittier and Santa Fe Springs, seek assistance from PIH for initial medical treatment, set up an office for assisting with establishing identification, documentation, and get people plugged into a state healthcare. Work with organizations like SAFRA for assistance to re-enter the workforce, and offer grants to transitional living programs that can help them enter the way into independence. Before we can get this done, I propose that we set up a commission to investigate such programs like in other cities and outside of California. There are great examples such as TROSA in North Carolina, the East Valley Med Center near Phoenix, Arizona. They have been successful, and we should follow their example.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, so rapid rehousing reduces risks of chronic homelessness for homeless populations, and it doesn't work for everyone. Those who have been on the streets for long stretches of time usually need more time to adjust and additional medical treatment. However, I do believe that emergency housing should be housed in industrial areas in our city. This can be in collaboration with other cities. I think it's important to realize that this is a regional issue. If we can collaborate with other cities to see who is willing to take on which part of this or type of housing. Right now, our closest location is in Bell, Boyle Heights, and then I believe after that is the Midnight Mission. And that also is a lot of times when folks are service resistant. They're service resistant because they don't want to go that far away from the city that they've grown up in to get the services that are needed. So I also would work with the county to ensure that we can create this. The question posed as political will, because that's exactly what it is. Whether or not we choose to solve the problem of homelessness is political will and what we're choosing or not choosing to do. I believe that there's 624 units in Whittier classified as low income for families, and we have next to none for single adults. And what we know is that they make up the bulk of folks that are living in Parnell Park and in other encampments across the city. So we definitely need to ensure that we have transitional housing for single adults. The type of services that I believe we can provide are certificate training, therapy. We have to realize living outside is a huge trauma. Folks are succumbed to very terrifying realities many times. And so if we're anticipating folks to go back into society and part of the workforce, then we have to ensure that we're giving them the support because that's what a community does. Cooking classes as well for younger folks that are experiencing homelessness. I mean, these may seem like basic things that most people know, but the reality is that if we're providing transitional housing, then we're also going to be providing them the skills that can make them successful when they are able to stand on their own. Also collaborating with entities that are willing to donate their time and energy. For example, in terms of career selection and getting back into the workforce, there are department stores that are willing to donate clothes and business clothes for folks prepping for interviews. These are the kinds of basic things that many folks that are housed often don't realize people that live on the street have no access to. And so things like that may seem second nature to us, but when it comes to folks living on the street, I think we should really be focused on providing them the means to live a dignified life and to get back on their own feet.
Since it is illegal to prejudge a council decision, and I am currently on the council, I cannot tell you what my decision would be or what a council decision would be in answer to this question. What I can say is determining what to build, where it would go, how long would it take, and how much it would cost would all be determined when a project were to be placed before the council. I would refer back to the example I gave in the previous question. The council will soon be issuing an RFP for affordable housing on the Alpha Beta site in Uptown Whittier. An example of affordable housing that is already completed in Whittier would be Mosaic Gardens on the corner of Pickering and Philadelphia, as well as the Gables condominiums in East Whittier, where there are 24 affordable units, as well as Guilford Court, which has 9 units. Additionally, the city has 276 very low-income units at Whittier Towers, William Penn Manor, and the Seasons at the Hoover. Again, I want to thank the organization that sponsored the event today. I really appreciate being able to send in these recorded answers. Thank you.
I think she was answering the question too.
It is difficult to ascertain. Is that correct, Susan? That was labeled as question 3, correct? Or is that
Yes,
labeled
it was.
as... All right, there you go. All right, continue with the mayoral responses.
All right, folks, thanks again for coming out. I know people start shifting. I'm getting tired. I'm kind of moving from cheek to cheek, sorry. But you know what? This is, like I said in the beginning, Boise compliancy. You know, we got to remember that. But you know what? For some of you that may not know, you can find out about my background on Facebook. You know, look me up. But I'm a security director here in Uptown. But first and foremost, I'm an engineer. I take ideas, I simplify them, and I create a solution that doesn't exist on a lot of occasions. When I'm lucky, there's a plan out there, and I just reuse it because it's already been invented. And some of you have heard about the San Francisco's plan. You know, what's the other one? San Francisco, Oakland, Seattle, and they tell us that they're burning. But we keep following the same plan. I'm not here to repeat the same plan. I'm not here to tell you this is what we're going to do. We're going to reach out. You know, Sacramento's putting pressure on us. Nothing like that. We have a solution. We have a building that's empty, like next door, that abandoned gas station. We have the old police station that gets maintained. We're paying for the maintenance of this location. It's secure. It's in the backyard of the city council. It's next to the police department. Because I don't want to see a homeless shelter being built on Esperanza, in my backyard, on your backyard, in our parks, by our schools, but we need a location. The police station makes sense because it's secure. They have a key card system, they have cameras, lockers, showers, and it costs money. Well, currently we have over $300,000 from what I read in the Whittier Daily News. $100,000 is being used, the rest is being put away in case. Case what? I think we need to be using it yesterday. But we open it up, we hire more city employees. I know we're in trouble, but the only way to do it is to create more business, bring in people. We do that, we maintain the building, we provide the spaces for these beds to be compliant with Boise, and we get nonprofits to come in and help daily. Because we hear people are feeding the homeless, people are doing this, people are doing that. I would hate to see the day where you would get in trouble to hand a person in need a bottle of water. That cannot happen. We need to bring them in, run a city, the city has to run it to be compliant, But more than anything, we could save money by using something we currently have, by using the help of our neighbors, which are these nonprofits. I've never had a plumbing issue and asked my neighbor, can you help me? Can you approach me? Can you give me a plan? No, we need to be thinking forward and creating solutions. That's who I am. I create the easiest solution, and sometimes one of the difficult things to do when you're sitting in a position for a long time. So let's make this possible. Let's become Boise compliant.
Well, this is a pretty complex question because it almost asks for an entire plan in 3 minutes. So, what different types of housing, emergency, transitional affordable support would you put where? You know, one of the things that we do have, and it was mentioned about the winter shelter program, I think that working with the churches and working with existing items and augmenting it with funding is a great way to create a year-round program with beds that already exist. That's an emergency issue that we can implement immediately with an MOU or some funding. We do have a lot of funding, it seems like, that's just been sitting there. Transitional housing, we do need, that's more a long-term issue. I feel that whether we're looking at locally, we should use city buildings. You know, Rolando suggested the old police station. I mean, we could look at different areas, and I think that's an issue because one of the things we need to meet on homelessness is a cycle. It's always going to be here, and we need to meet that cycle. We need to create a cycle of how to it is going to be people are being homeless all the time, and they're going to get out of homelessness. They're going to get back in. Affordable housing, again, we talked about really about affordability. We do need it. We can look at innovative solutions. And you know, one of the things that mental health and drug addiction services, we do have a lot of, we're blessed that we have a lot of nonprofits. The city needs to work in together in tandem with the nonprofits. Not dictate the nonprofits in a downward communication, but you know, let's work together. Let's hire a homeless coordinator. That just focuses on that issue. I think a coordinator is better than I heard the word czar. I think czar is like a drug czar, or getting right to crack academic. This is a humanitarian issue. We should work with our fellow neighbors. In July, I actually wrote a friendly neighbor plan, a 9-point plan about how to address homelessness. And one of the key features of it, when I thought about it, and this is what I really want to run for office, that's how I would approach it, is we treat people dignity and have two-way communication with the homeless. Have two-way communication with our Whittier, everyone. And see where do we fit these issues, how do we meet them? Funding's always been difficult. It is interesting that we have the HUD funding, block grants, we have the home HUD funding, we have about 9.8 million of WHA, low and moderate housing, that can be used for emergency shelters. Accordingly, this was attached to the agenda. I know this was brought forth on council, and they really started moving forward about 4 months ago, and said, wow, these are funding. Those are ways that we can look at it. Thank you.
So, different types of housing. I believe that we should have emergency and transitional housing. Well, for sure we need emergency housing. I've always been in favor of a navigation center. When I first started running for office, I mean, you know, homelessness is a big issue. So I started looking into what other cities were doing, and I'm very pleased with what I did with the research that I found regarding Fremont's navigation, city of Fremont in Northern California, their navigation center. Some things that I would like to see in Whittier's future navigation center is emergency beds. If an individual finds himself without a place to go that night, to go to this navigation center, to have a place to rest their head at night. One experience that I've had recently, last year before I started running for office, which also, kind of helped me do this, is there's an individual who's lived in Whittier her entire life, over 90 years old, sleeping in her car in her church parking lot. So where was she supposed to go? Luckily, my friend, has a couch and let her sleep there. And you know what she said? She said it was so great to not have to sleep, to emergency housing, transitional housing, affordable housing is, separately, which is what I want to do when working with developers and also working with efficiency with the departments. Where would I put it? What would I build? And how long would it take? What services would be provided? How much would it cost? Looking at the current Whittier homelessness plan in order to reach out to stakeholders and other individuals, it costs a little bit more than $3 million. And today when I was canvassing with someone else, an iron worker, he said speed costs money, which is true. So we need to look at if $3 million is actually sustainable and is that even enough to move forward. The plan was supposed to be completed in 2021, we're in 2020, and I don't see, this happening within the next year. Something else is that $274,766 is also included in the plan to assist with other local nonprofits that are helping. So truly, I would like to see the cold weather shelter, get people out of the cycle of poverty. It was just really eye-opening to me to learn that these individuals, and it's interesting because when I'm at Starbucks or when I go to other coffee shops, I see those same homeless individuals that are on their computer that are trying to figure something out. So that's what I feel, and this is truly, and going to other homelessness consortium and homelessness community meetings, homelessness is a man-made issue, so we do need the man-made solutions. Thank you.
I don't think there's any question. Everybody here, everybody in the council wants to make sure that Whittier does its part for housing. The question is about emergency, transitional, affordable, supportive, etc. And those are all, each one of them are different species of housing. So with respect to affordable, which we just talked about previously, but I'll say it again, the city is actually looking at sites for that type of housing. There are some city sites that are being looked at, and there are some non-owned city sites that might work well, owned by others. But anything that we would do as a city in terms of affordable and other types of housing would have to have wraparound services. But I want you all to remember, we are in a build-out city, so it's a matter of being as creative as we can to find infill situations. On the other type of housing, such as emergency and transitional, navigation shelters, probably what we're looking at is based upon the Fremont model. Mona has something, we've been out there, we've been to a couple different. We're I think, looking at the Fremont situation, which provides lots of flexibility for homeless, especially those who are newly homeless. So it has wraparound services with it. So as part of this whole thing, we've just talked previously about providing incentives, such as speeding up permit processing, zoning, ADUs. ADUs are important, and they provide an opportunity for us. There's another idea that's coming out that's really intriguing, and that is looking at underperforming retail and commercial areas where the highest and best use of that property might not be retail or commercial, but it might be housing. And so that's something that's going to be looked at, and that's also on a regional basis. I do want to say that, going back and just finish up the prior question, SB 50 was defeated this week, and Kyle's taken off, but Senator Archuleta voted against it, which was very important to us because that's the one that would have put, you could put all kinds of housing in single-family neighborhoods without any local control whatsoever. No hearings, no anything. Yes, we need housing. Sacramento's coming up with ideas, but we need to make sure, I said to